Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargeant. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back. Now, when it comes to a child's preschool milestones and development, parents and teachers play an active role in building a motivating environment. For some kids, and I know that I've said this about myself as a child, keeping a child's attention is one of the most difficult things to do. Our guest today is an internationally acclaimed author, researcher, and an educational consultant. He has worked with children, parents, and educators in all things literacy for over 4 decades. Dr. Richard Gentry, thank you so much for joining me, Richard.
Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here.
Now, with the length of time that you focused on literacy and children, what made you specifically want to work in this area?
Well, my mom was my first grade teacher, and she taught me to read and inspired me to make my lifelong legacy to help others and help children with literacy. So it just came naturally. And she lived to be 96. She was in good shape up until almost the end. And one of the things she said to me is, I hope that some of my words are in a page or two of yours. And her life and parenting, as well as my father, on every page in that book. In my books, I have 18 books.
Wow. No, it's amazing that they've made such a legacy as well, and you sort of added on to that and built on and shared it with the world as well.
Yeah, it's been an exciting journey all the way, for sure.
So what is the most common frustration parents have sort of claimed during a child's literacy skills?
Well, let's start with, what do you think parenting is? Because that kind of gets into what you're asking here. What would be my definition of parenting? Because it can be different for each person. I think parenting is what one does to influence the life of children, and it can extend over a lifetime. And of course, it can be good parenting, or children can be harmed by not good parenting. Parents influence their children and their children's children up through generations. I personally have taken parenting roles for nieces and nephews at various stages in their lives. And Dina, I was really fortunate to have wonderful parents myself, and wonderful grandparents and uncles and aunts who played an immense role in helping to shape my life. So in the final analysis, parenting is a major way we influence future generations. So it's one of the most important and wonderful opportunities available.
Well, thank you so much, Richard, for that introduction. Before we do get started, I'd love to get to know some of your recommendations as well as some of your interests by playing a little game, quick little icebreaker to help us get warm.
Okie doke.
Now, do you have a favorite book?
Oh, I do have a favorite book that I'm reading right at the moment, and it's called Breaking Through by Susan Sussman. She was Pfizer's communication leader during the pandemic, and the book is autobiographical, But it's not so much about her work with Pfizer, but about her whole life. And it has a lot to do with how her parents brought her up. It's funny and inspirational. And the core of the book is about how to bring about change in a very positive way in every aspect of life. It could be a corporate life, change in your office work, or change in your everyday life at home. It has had a great impact on my career goal, which is to bring about change in how we teach reading, writing, and spelling, and how to promote literacy.
Oh, that's such an amazing book. It's amazing how much, if when a book comes in and it really does impact your way of thinking, it really does sort of impact the way that your career goes as well. So I love the way that book, the way that you explain that book as well.
I would recommend this book for anyone. It's been a bestseller on the New York Times list, so I'm not the only one who found it really impactful.
Well, that's amazing to hear. That's very impressive, actually. Now, when it comes to movies, do you have a movie that you've recently enjoyed?
I do. Just very recently, I saw Oppenheimer with Cillian Murphy. He's an Australian actor, and it's the story of the American scientist. He plays that role, and his role is in building, and it's about his role in building the atomic bomb. And it's such a compelling story. I had no idea of the history that went behind his life and the building of that bomb. And again, it's been very highly acclaimed, and it's a movie I would recommend for anyone. Have you seen it?
I actually missed out on seeing it, which I feel starting to feel really badly about that. But I have heard a lot of reviews about it saying that it's worth the watch. So I'm definitely going to be able to find some way of watching it somehow.
I think it's streaming now, so you may be able to get it that way, but you'll definitely be able to see it.
Yes, no, I really do want to see it. I think after everyone's been talking about it, now it's like, oh, okay, I do feel like I've missed out on seeing something very impactful. But it does sound like I've heard a lot of my friends talking about it, and it does sound like such a interesting view into a lot of the work that he's done and a lot of the things that we don't really know about his life, while other than like what his work was.
Yeah, and it has an amazing cast and amazing director, so definitely put it on your list.
Yes, well, I'm annoyed especially because Cillian Murphy is one of my favorite actors. So I was really frustrated at myself that I didn't go see it earlier, but now I definitely have to.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to a podcast, do you have any podcasts that you could sort of recommend to us today?
You know, I listen to podcasts about every week or so, and usually regarding literacy, because so often you can really hear from experts who you might not otherwise be able to catch up with. And there's one, though, that I particularly love. It's entitled... there's one that I particularly love. It's Lori and no, I got it wrong. It's one I particularly love entitled Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. It's from Great Minds, and they do a podcast about every Friday. So it certainly has. I've been on their podcast as well.
Oh, wow.
And I continue to hear from folks who, months later, who have listened to that. So I guess that's one of my favorites. It keeps going and going.
Yeah. So what about that podcast really stands out for you?
Well, they bring in some of the most powerful and impactful reading researchers, but also it is put on by the two of them and their teachers. So it's very powerful in making that often difficult transition from research to practical application in the classroom. It's one of the
Yes.
best ways to do that.
Yeah, no, that sounds very interesting as to how, I mean, we talk about a lot of researchers and they have a lot of information, but how to sort of apply that information in not only teachers but parents as well, it must be a really difficult, um also another scientific way of doing it. So no, that
Absolutely.
podcast does sound amazing.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to role models, either in your professional or personal life, do you have a person that you find yourself looking up to?
Well, I have a lot of them for various roles. And I don't want to get political, but currently I'm really inspired by President Joe Biden. I respect that he's 80 years old and bringing both experience and wisdom to the table. So if you're asking me recently who I've been inspired by, it's the President of the United States, President Joe Biden.
Well, no, that's great. That's great to hear. He has made such an impact on, I mean, I probably watch more of of the news in the US and politics in the US than I do in my own country. So it definitely stands out a whole lot more than Australian politics to me. And it's so much of it has so many different opinions. And I love the fact that even though he is 80 years old, he's still very much talking with younger generations. Has a lot of input, and he adds a lot of input into things that really do matter, which I think is a great achievement for someone who, like, so different from a lot of other political leaders that I've seen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So when it comes to courses, and this can be either a professional course or it can be a course that you take just to sort of stay up to date. But is there a course that has really inspired a lot of the work that you do?
Well, I'm going to kind of make this one very short because there are absolutely too many to count. And so many of them of course, I'm a lifelong learner. And I'm always hungry for new information. And it's now so widely available, so many ways to get up to date or the latest knowledge or hear from the latest researcher in my field of literacy. So I tune in a lot.
Well, that's great. It's great to see that you're still trying to keep updated with everything that changes, every new thing. I think, especially when it comes to research, there's always something new piece of research that comes out pretty much every day.
Yes. And, with neuroscience and cognitive psychology, there's been an absolute explosion of new knowledge about how the brain learns to read, for example. And we'll be talking about some of that in the podcast today. And it's being transformational for the science of reading is a transformational movement that I've very much been involved with.
Well, that's great. And I can't wait to explore that even further today. I think it's going to be such a great way to sort of see how education and how literacy specifically has really improved and really gotten easier for a lot of students to be more engaged with it.
Well, I'll give you a caution. It hasn't all improved yet. It's a new movement that's just beginning to change things worldwide. For 3 decades, we've had literacy practice in classrooms that many feel have not been are not supported by the latest research. So we'll talk about some of that.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. Now, I know that you've sort of defined what parenting is to you a little bit earlier in the show.
Uh-huh.
And so when it comes to that, what do you think that expectant parents should be aware of in their transition to parenting?
Well, that's the thing that I think they should be most the thing that I think they should be most aware of is that parenting is a great responsibility that extends over one's lifetime. I have a British couple from London visiting in my home right now. They're here for holiday season. And they recently celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in London. And what's been inspiring to me is that they've been in daily contact with their children and their grandchildren back in London. And they all keep up with each other and help each other. And to me, that's part of good parenting, that it spreads through generations. It keeps on going and coming back to you and going out and coming back.
Yeah, no, I definitely am amazed at the fact that the constant communication between that. I think that's such an amazing achievement to have, especially when it comes to both sides wanting that communication. I think
Yes.
that's a great achievement, because I know parents want communication with kids, but sometimes kids sort of have that, okay, life gets busy, situation gets busy. So when it comes to children also wanting that everyday, that daily communication, I think that's such a great way of doing it.
Yeah. And there's so much more opportunity now than, when Thomas Jefferson was in France, and he had to send letters that took weeks and weeks back and forth to the folks back home. So it really is amazing.
Yeah, no, it really is. Now, when it comes to the development of a preschooler, can you provide us with a little bit of an overview as to what some of those fundamental aspects are?
Yes, Dina, let's start with 2 points. First is we're going to be thinking about how children learn to speak language. And secondly, we'll be looking at how very young children learn to read a language. Both of these often begin with parenting. I think the focus has to be on the whole child. It includes physical and intellectual, emotional, and spiritual development. It's really about the child's well-being and happiness. Fundamentally, preschool development is helping to open the child to a world of possibilities. And literacy, reading, writing, spelling, vocabulary development are absolutely at the whole heart of the matter. I think about this, literacy development think about this, literacy development begins with spoken language development. And that begins in the 3rd trimester, even before birth. Some remarkable things are happening in the baby's brain for developing spoken language. Virtually every aspect of the reading process relies upon the oral language or the spoken language. Here's what happens when we read. Text is visually processed. Letters and letter sequences are visually scanned on the page, and then in the brain matched to speech sounds, the speech sounds and words used in oral language. So the beginnings of literacy is when babies develop their spoken language, generally between birth and age 2. So, Dina, let's think about components for a moment of oral language that children begin developing. It's very complex. They're developing all of this in their brains between birth and age 2. One of the components is called phonology, and that is the speech sounds of language. Eventually, when learning to read and write, children are going to match letters or chunks of letters to those speech sounds. And that process begins with birth. And parenting is so much a part of that. So here's kind of a fun example that I just experienced in the last couple of days with my British visitors. They're words that we read, we visually scan on the page, but then the phonology in our different languages is very different based on the language that we speak. For example, the word vitamin, in America, we call it vitamins. In London, they call it vitamins. Or there's the word schedule. We call it, American English phonology calls it schedule. In Britain, it's schedule. And then, of course, there's tomato and tomato that even at lunchtime today, we had a discussion about. So phonology, the speech sounds of language starts at the very beginning, is so essential for reading. Another component of oral language that babies and toddlers are developing is called morphology. And that has to do with word-forming elements. For example, putting root words, prefixes, and endings. For example, toddlers are beginning to learn a word like cat, and that means one cat. But if you put the sound on the end, that word part, it makes it more than one cat. Another component, semantics, probably is most important, and that's the vocabulary of word meanings. All of that beginning from with babies and toddlers. And then syntax, phrase and sentence structures and rules for combining them. All of these systems interact in speaking and listening, and also in reading and writing. So here's an interesting question at the heart of learning to speak and learning to read. Is learning to read as natural as learning to speak? Is your brain wired up for learning to speak and learning to read? Interestingly, you want to take a stab at it?
I don't know. I think it's a lot easier to hear things than to read things.
Absolutely.
Especially with the way that a child, sort of the first view on, I think from what I'm hearing as well, from the first view on words is how the parents say it, especially when it comes to accents and dialects and the way that they say the words. It's the child's first view as to how to say a phrase like tomato. I say tomato, but I know a lot of my friends say tomato. I know a lot of my dad says tomato, my mom says tomato, because when she learned English, she learned from the British English, and my dad learned from the Australian, New Zealand kind of dialect as well. So there's a lot of different ways on how to say it. So when I heard tomato, I had contrasting views on both my parents as to how to say different things and different phrases and different words as well. I think so. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to hear things phonetically than to read things out by phonetics when you're sort of breaking it down each word.
And that's exactly what we've learned. However, in that science of reading movement, we have actually had 3 decades of instruction based on, in the classroom, based on what's called whole language or balanced literacy. And we won't get into the weeds in that, but it's interesting to point out that major universities, for example, City College in New York and La Trobe University, the literacy departments are trying to move worldwide this movement of making sure that the kinds of curricula that we find in classrooms and the kinds of techniques that teachers are using are based on what we know about how the brain works. So it's really a fascinating and exciting thing that's happening right now. The human infant is a language learning machine. Studies have shown that newborns can hear the differences between a remarkable number of sounds, just as you just pointed out in your tomato. You're able to process and use both of those. Some of these speech sounds from other language that don't even occur in the native language. And in fact, research has suggested that some of these speech processing abilities are actually functioning in the last trimester of pregnancy, so that this human baby learning machine is actually able to listen to the cadence and beginning to statistically analyze input that's coming from the mother's voice when she reads aloud or sings to the baby, or the father's as well. And so they are developing oral motor control also that allows for speech production. This stuff starts early with cooing and crying. The speech sounds appear in babbling, and eventually that develops into words. This is kind of interesting research from around the world focused on many different languages suggests that infants go through universal stages of babbling regardless of what language they're exposed to. From about 0 to 2 months of age, they're cooing, and that cooing is mostly vowel sounds. From 2 to 8 months, they get into babbling where the same consonant vowel combination may be repeated over and over. For example, ba, ba, ba. From 8 to 12 months, there's more elaborate babbling with varied consonant and vowel sequences and patterns of intonation. And this may sound like the baby is really talking, but without any clear words evident. And it's believed that these stages universally across all language develop the skills needed in the brain for understanding speech production and the baby's first words. So I think it's really interesting to see how complex it all is. Word production generally happens between 12 and 18 months of age. It has been estimated that kids go from a few words initially, babies, toddlers, to as many as 10,000 by the time that they start school. So the process, you see, is being able to put all of this together, put those speech sounds together so that you can match them with the patterns in the sounds of words in their spoken language. It's really quite fascinating.
No, I really do think it is. I think there's so much that we haven't spoken about on the show, especially when it comes to literacy skills, and phonetics, I think, is a big one as well. Because I sort of remember I have conversations with my mom quite a lot on sort of how I was as a child, and sort of especially this show has really helped bring out questions as to how did I react when I was at that age. So when we're talking about my own sort of growth and literacy and reading and all of those, there was a lot of things that were done phonetically, a lot of things that I couldn't spell, but a lot of things I knew how to spell and how to sound it out. So things like phone, for example, with the PH, I used to always spell it, F, because I knew the F has the F sound.
Yes.
So I said F-O-N-E instead of P-H-O-N-E. And that was a lot of my first views, because I know that that's a really hard word to spell. And especially if you're having to spell it out, there's a lot of things that sort of come out. So phonetically as well made it so much easier to sort of have that view on, okay, I can get I know the sounds, but I don't know that PH also makes a F sound.
And that is just at the heart of this scientific movement. We now know that children are born with circuitry for learning to speak, but no one is born with circuitry for learning to read. Reading has to be taught. And what we now know from the science is that spelling and phonics, which is exactly what you're talking about, is at the very core, foundational core of the reading brain. So it's very important for parents to begin to start participating in with children to help them, which leads to our next question, I think.
Yes. No, I think it really does. So with this next question, I think especially when it comes to sort of going into the preschool ages, and more specifically when they sort of can speak, but learning to read and write, how to sort of get them to start participating in those activities such as reading and writing, and also spelling really takes a high precedent in that as well.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with speech, because that's at the very beginning. We have to, from the very beginning, immerse children. From the very beginning, we immerse children in meaningful language. Now, with babies, there are two simple means of providing such language, and they are called self-talk and parallel talk. That self-talk is simply telling the child what you're doing. So imagine you're with the baby, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. It turns out you could be anything that the baby might be paying attention to. It provides an opportunity for language input. Parallel talk means that talking in parallel with what is happening, what the child is paying attention to. And you can direct their attention to objects, provide vocabulary, and describe whatever it is the child is paying attention to. So it's all about language input. The child needs to hear a lot of language input. One activity is called motherese. It's a high-pitched sing-song voice, lower and slightly louder than normal speech, and contrasting in sounds and syllables. So instead of, if the baby just noticed a car go by, you might say something like, "Oh, baby, see the car? It's a red car." So they're learning, their brains are soaking in the sounds of those words, and eventually they will get to the meaning. One thing to avoid, however, is what's sometimes referred to as baby talk. You've heard parents who change the sound of the word to try to make it sound more baby-like, and that's something to avoid, because you want them to get the sounds of the red car and not the baby talk sounds. And then there are rules for reading aloud to babies and toddlers. For example, both mom and dad should have a daily routine of reading aloud. And the reason reading aloud is so important is that there are so many more words that you're introducing children to that are not in everyday speech. For example, words like hippopotamus or giraffe, if you're reading zoo books, aren't going to come up in the everyday language that we usually speak. Always make it fun, both mom and dad. Baby smiles. Baby smile at about 3 weeks of age and respond not only to your voice, but to skin, to your touch and smell. And it's such a powerful way of bonding with kids. In fact, it's said that parents who read to their child from the very beginning love their children more than parents who have not had this kind of intimate reading aloud interaction. It's just a bonding experience. You want to keep books simple and provide lots of repetition. Some favorite books may be read hundreds of times, and the parent is sick of that book. But think about each time from the child to the time the baby is soon after birth until like 12, 14 months later, their brain is changing developmentally, and they're responding to that same repeated book over and over. So the baby is paying attention and will grow. What the baby is paying attention to will grow along with the baby growing into a toddler. One of the things that some parents might benefit from when they start early with babies is you start out with face-to-face contact. You want the baby to see your face and lips. After 2 months, you want to hold the book so the baby can see both your face and the illustrations. And it's interesting to know that babies don't have visual capacity for colors until about 3 months. Seeing colors happens about 3 months, and that baby's vision is developing. And primary colors like red, blue, green, and yellow have been found to be more attention-grabbing for babies who are developing. Seeing and remembering illustration comes in at about 5 months of age. So there are all these little tips that coming from both parents who have had success with building their child's language and literacy, but also the research now informing us. Another thing to do when reading aloud is to use that parallel talk and explain what's happening in the story. In other words, just don't read the stories in the book, but if you need to stop and talk about the bunny and explain what the bunny is doing, that's a good thing. And all the parents ask, when is the best time to read? What would you guess? If you're working with babies, when's the best time?
I would like to go ahead. I would like to be optimistic and say almost straight away, almost start reading to them when they're infants, because there's a lot of things that they can sort of learn. I think from the moment they can see, I have a lot of my friends who sort of they did a little experiment as to the first child they were so attentive to. They were reading from it from a very early age. And the second child, I think they took their time with building their skills. They're sort of a little bit more laid back because they were also busy having 2 kids at that point. But I think they had 2 different ways. And I do see that the impact of a child being read to right from infancy and right from a very, very young age, that their phonetic skills and their reading skills are a little bit more advanced.
Dina, absolutely right. So important to start from the beginning, from at birth or even before birth. And the other part of that is any time is good. Babies, some tips. Babies love to be rocked to rhythm of poems and rhymes. They love to do peekaboo, as everyone knows. And that's really related to seeing what comes next, which is very much a part of reading a story and predicting, well, what's going to come next. It's kind of like starting so early with the connecting in with the peekaboo activity, using finger plays like this little pig went to the market, this little pig stayed home. Always make it fun. Parents, when they're reading, should use animal noises and sound effects and stop when the baby seems restless. So a few of the tips that might help out a little bit. So what are some common changes? The next question, I guess, we're ready for.
Yes. I did want to ask, I think a little bit earlier, you were also talking about how it's important for the child to see the book, but also see the reader's facial expressions throughout the story. How
And the
important,
lips.
yeah, so how important is that when it comes to, is it mainly important for the child to sort of see the connection between how it's spoken and how it's read, or also the scenario of the story and to see how they should react to the story as well, whether they should be sad or whether they should be happy, and sort of added to their emotional intelligence?
All of that is absolutely
Okay.
part of what they're taking in. So it's very sharp to for you to pick up on all of those aspects. And remember that, as the baby continues to develop, um, the kind of response is going to change a little bit, but a parent can tell when babies are, attention is, and they're having fun and they're enjoying it. And the parent can certainly tell if they're, getting a little restless, and that's the cue that it's time to put that book aside.
Okay, so they can sort of build their own imagination from that story as well, whether they enjoy that book being read. Because I know a lot of toddlers, they sort of have that point where they don't really want that specific book being read. So there is that understanding of differentiation between what stories they do like and what stories they don't like to hear.
Yeah, and the ones that you should go with are always the ones that they like to hear. That's 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 a rule. Make it fun, and although you don't want to hear it again because you've read it 100 times, so uh, be patient and realize that every time that story is being read, the child is focusing in on some other aspect of the story.
Okay. So when it comes to the challenges that sort of take place, what are some of the common challenges that a lot of preschoolers may encounter during their own journey into different kinds of learning that they're going to do, particularly in reading and writing and the impact of spelling as well?
Well, they go through. It's all about input again, and the developing brain really needs this input. Reading, writing, and spelling are all start early with things like drawing and pretend writing. Even things as early as making footprints in the sand and using finger paints are part of that process. By 12 months of age, if not sooner, show the baby how to hold a marker. They've already been smearing food on the high chair and, learning to use their fingers to do the first artwork. By 2 years of age, if you have a masterpiece that they've done, painting or finger paint or whatever, put it on the refrigerator and make sure you can encourage this kind of creativity, because creativity is so much a part of this developmental process. Always put the child's name on the paper. In fact, seeing and learning to write one's name is a jump start to literacy. Right? It's quite an accomplishment, and you don't expect the child to be able to understand all about how the process works at that point. This is preschool, but it's so important to teach the alphabet song, to make magnetic letters, and when reading, all through this process, draw the child's attention to those letters and talk about how those letters represent sounds of words. It's important to play games such as, I'm thinking of a word. This is right before, preschool. I'm thinking of a word that rhymes with look and starts with the B sound. And connect that with other things, B, just like your brother sounds that sound, or the boy b sound. So you do a lot of that kind of wordplay with phonemes and rhyming words. It's so important on this journey. Remember that learning to read English takes time. Here's a really important point. The early journey to English takes time because it has such a complex spelling system. And you already tied us into that. Spelling is at the very core of the foundation for literacy. For example, Italian is much easier to learn to read and spell because it's a very close letter to sound match. Italian kids can put the decoding and encoding together, can learn to read in about 6 to 9 months. English, because it has 44 sounds and over 1,000 spelling patterns, is going to take roughly 2 years from the beginning of preschool to the end of first grade or beginning second grade. And it's easy to understand because the English language the alphabet system is so complex. The letter A sound, for example, has 8 different spellings. And words like cell, C-E-L-L, S-E-L-L, and S-A-L-E, these homonym words, are part of what makes English so complex. And again, spelling is at the very foundation of how the brain is learning to read. In fact, we begin with preschoolers and kids in kindergarten, 4 and 5-year-olds, encouraging pencil and paper activity, teaching them to write their name. And we can literally look at what's called invented spelling, which is their attempt to spell a word. It happens in those 5 phases, and we can watch them from preschool to the first half of kindergarten, to the second half of kindergarten, to the first half of first grade, to the second grade, to the second half of first grade, or when they enter second grade, beginning in second grade. We have seen them by looking at these invented spellings. It's kind of a window into mind of how they understand or think the words work. So it might be helpful to just take a moment and talk about each of those phases. The first phase is called non-alphabetic spelling. And this is a preschool phase. And it's not even spelling, because what it is scribbling or just wavy lines or curly lines, any kind of scribbling. It's called non-alphabetic because there are no alphabetic letters there. But that's where teaching the child to write, or having the child see his or her name and learning to write, eventually learning to read it first and then write it, is so important, because that helps them move to the next phase, which is phase 1. It's called pre-alphabetic. The first phase is non-alphabetic. Now we're going to pre-alphabetic. They're using the alphabet, but they don't know that letters represent sounds. So we see a lot, generally speaking, a lot of this kind of spelling in the first half of kindergarten. And then by the next half of kindergarten, we see them move to a level where, for the first time, they are beginning to match some letters. It's called partial alphabetic spelling. So the change that you've seen in these invented spellings, you go to the grocery store and have the child make a grocery list. If it's pre-alphabetic spelling, it looks like random letters. You might think you could read it, and you can ask the kid what he's writing, or she's writing, but you won't be able to read it because the letters don't match with sounds. But by the end of kindergarten, they have made that kind of development, and you can see it in their spelling. Also, you can see it in their word reading, but you can't really see word reading. You can. That's why looking at their invented spelling is so important. And then they move into first grade, and generally in normal development, what you see is kids moving into a really fascinating phase where they are inventing spellings that are called full alphabetic spelling. And they don't look like English, but you can read them because they are matching not just part of the letters to sounds, but all of the letters to sounds. So a word like eagle, for example, they may spell E-G-O. It's like finger spelling. E with an E, G with a G, O with an L. But of course, English doesn't work that way. So ultimately, they need to move to phase 4 by the end of first grade or beginning second grade, and they are doing consolidated automatic spelling. And what has happened is that they have learned the logical chunks of English spelling, and all of that is a result of the direct instruction, systematic instruction in phonics and spelling in the first half of first grade. So you will see them, for example, begin to use vowels in every syllable. They'll be spelling ED ending with an ED and not like it sounds like in jumped. In that previous stage, they spelled it. Phase 3, they spelled jumped with a T. Phase 4, you have taught them in explicit instruction in phonics that ED ending is spelled ED. Or traded, the word traded, if they tried to write that, traded, they would use ID maybe in phase 3, but by the time they're in phase 4, they're going to move to spelling it with ED ending. So it gets back to the whole notion of you have to be patient. It takes a lot of time for kids to go through these very complex developmental phases because of because of the complexity of the English spelling system. And ultimately, what is interesting is that last phase is called consolidated automatic. That is, you've consolidated chunks of letter patterns, like CAT is cat, and they can now automatically see that word and connect with cat in their spoken language. And what has happened is that in phase 3, they're using a lot of short-term memory. For example, if they're spelling eagle, they've got to think E. Let's see, what kind of letter do I use to make E? Oh, here's an E. A lot of short-term memory. G. They've got to figure out in short-term memory what do I use to make the G sound with? Oh yeah, let's use this one. But all of that becomes consolidated and automatic, so that by the end of first grade, kids should have like over 300 what we call brain words that are consolidated and that they can automatically spell without even thinking about it and connect to those words in their long-term memory. Now, it works the same with adults. Good readers, all good readers have in the left hemisphere of their brain, most good readers have a left hemisphere reading system, and there's an area called the word form area, the visual word form area. And it's literally a dictionary in the brain where you can see the word that you have mastered the spelling. We call it a brain word. You can see that in your mind, and your brain automatically connects to the spoken language aspects, the oral language, the sound of the word, the meaning of the word. The brain does that automatically. So you're not even aware that you're using the spelling. But every time you read, you're using that automatic connection of this visual image of spelling in your mind's eye in that special area of the brain and connecting it to those words in your spoken language. It's an amazing process. Your brain is a statistical machine that takes in so much information, and when it gets to long-term memory, you're not even aware that when you read, every time you read, if there are 25 words in 2 sentences, that your brain has automatically seen those 25 spellings in that visual word form area and automatically connected to that word, which you're able, in your spoken vocabulary, where you already have the word's meaning and the syntax and know how it all fits together. And that's what comprehension is all about. So, they sometimes call me the guru of spelling. I'm going to tell you about some of my books. I'm the author of a major science-based spelling textbook. And it's so powerful for kids, particularly beginning in first grade, first half of the year, and the second half of the year, and then but up through the rest of elementary school. It's so powerful to build vocabulary for comprehension and to build those spelling skills. Because in general, good readers, and I think you already said this in our chat, good readers can spell, but in general, poor readers or struggling readers, and particularly kids who may have some biological specific reading disability like dyslexia. The problem is that they don't have a full brain word representation of that word's automatic spelling. And that's why, this is what you mentioned, spelling is so complex for people who struggle with learning to read, and particularly kids with dyslexia.
Yeah, so especially when it comes to, and I think you're talking about those 4 phases.
Yes.
So when it comes to those phases, if you do have sort of learning difficulties such as dyslexia as well, how do those 4 different phases, are they a little bit different? Are they a little bit longer just for a lot of people with learning difficulties?
Such a good question, such a good point. They are so powerful in helping you recognize that the child isn't moving along the normal developmental path, so that you can even look at invented spelling, and instead of going from the phase 1 to phase 2, pre-alphabetic to partial alphabetic to full alphabetic to finally at the end of first grade, phase 4, the consolidated automatic alphabetic. If kids aren't going through those phases, that's a red flag. It may be a symptom that they need early intervention. And if you see these spellings and they're using a conglomeration of all those together, that's another symptom that, hey, something's a little amiss here. And that's why spelling books are so important, because spelling books enable you to see if kids are developed, if they're learning the explicit instruction in this complex spelling system of English, or if they're struggling. And if you do like a pre-test, you can see if they have what you need to teach. So it kind of helps you not only monitor instruction, but it helps you know what you need to teach or which kids aren't getting it, and maybe you need to have a small group or individual instruction. Other thing about dyslexia is that it happens on a continuum. So you can have kids who are mildly dyslexic, moderately dyslexic, or severely dyslexic. And what we know from science is it's likely that only a very small percentage of kids, maybe 2%, have severe dyslexia. But all teachers are going to have kids in their classrooms. And if kids have severe dyslexia, everyone is different, but they're going to need intervention. Maybe even parents need to go to the pediatrician or to a special, it takes a medical doctor, because it's neural, a medical doctor to diagnose dyslexia. Schools don't diagnose dyslexia, but schools and parents are the first people who can see. Schools or teachers and parents are the first ones who can see these important symptoms and know that we need to intervene now, because what we know, if you wait until third or fourth grade, which is what often happens, it's too late. The child already hates school, because kids know that they go to first grade to learn to read. And if by the end of first grade you've not learned to read and you're a little kid, you're not happy in school. And if you're asked to read and everybody else can read and you are supposed to read in front of the rest of the kids, it's demoralizing, And then it just gets worse and worse. And there is research that shows that if you wait too long, third or fourth grade, a lot of these kids don't make it in academia. And you have a disproportionate number of these kids who end up dropping out of school, having a struggle with all aspects of life. Even some research that connects with drug abuse, a number of people in prison. There's interestingly, a disproportionate number of folks in prison who have dyslexia. But there's hope, because there's also some research, and I think I mentioned, well, not in the podcast, but to you, that I blog for Psychology Today. And I did a recent blog on how there's new research coming out from neuroscientists that suggests that dyslexia may be a gift, that we are biologically given gifts such as being able to solve problems, divergent thinking, artistic abilities, entrepreneurial abilities. There are a disproportionate number of brilliant entrepreneurs who have dyslexia. And if you look across successful careers, a lot of folks who have dyslexia have done very, very well because they have genetically, they use more of their right hemisphere for various kinds of activities, like, and sometimes in sports, they have mixed dominance. They can do, left-handed and right-handed. Those are all brain activities that we're learning are sometimes connected with dyslexia. So it could be a gift. It has been in my case.
Yeah, no, that's really great to hear that there's research saying that there is positives to it, because I come onto the show and I talk about my own journey with dyslexia as a child as well, and not being diagnosed until I was probably in my late teens, I think about 18, 19, after school. And I did the diagnosis as an adult, as on my own, because I always felt that there was something that it wasn't just me not being smart enough, but there was something actually there. And so when that diagnosis came through, it was such a relief as well to sort of have that, okay, it wasn't because I wasn't trying. It wasn't because I wasn't really wanting to learn. And you're definitely right when it comes to reading out loud in the class. That was a traumatic time for a lot of kids. But one thing that really stood out for me was the fact that I was incredibly good at spelling. So when it came to spelling, I could spell with only seeing the word once. So you give me a word and I could spell it almost immediately, and just knowing and seeing the word. And that was where I think I masked a lot of the dyslexia, mainly because I hid behind being able to spell really good, and that worked out for me when it came to writing anything.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I said all dyslexics are different, but it's usually just the opposite. It's usually that kids who are or adults who are dyslexic have particular difficulty with spelling, and the fact that you could see it, and just shows how different all our brains are. And you were, you found this way of overcoming the difficulties you were having with dyslexia. So you're a wonderful case study.
I wish I found out a bit sooner that I really was, because I think it would have definitely helped. Because I think growing up, I was always sent to the special ed class.
Yes.
Because I think all my teachers knew that there was something there. But because like when it came to dyslexia, and the way that my parents really saw dyslexia was a lot of, okay, that means words are flying off the pages, which means that they can't read properly. Because I could read, because I could spell and read, that sort of covered up a lot of the fact. So there was that huge contrast in, okay, and that's all we knew about dyslexia for pretty much all of my childhood. That was the only view that we had on what dyslexia was.
Absolutely. And I've encountered several adults in my experience now who are just like you. They have gone on to achieve great things, but even as one that comes to mind that I wrote about in one of my Psychology Today blogs, learned that she was dyslexia when she was in a doctoral program at a major university in the Midwest. And she went to that center and went through like all these tests with the specialist and the medical doctors and it was such a relief for her to understand that, hey, it's just dyslexia. I'm not stupid. And I went through all of this struggle. And that's part of my mission, and what I hope to be my legacy is to help folks better understand how the reading, writing, spelling brain works, and how we can how we can make this not such a tough journey that it has been for so many people, because we know a lot more about it now. And we're learning new stuff every day,
I know.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's also amazing at the fact that how much we've learned, but also how much we haven't taken what we've learned from a lot of case studies and a lot of scientific facts, and we haven't really made a lot of changes in either, especially in schools, in the curriculum to sort of make it a bit easier for a lot of kids. And I was looking at one of my friends, she's a teacher, and she showed me some of the things that they're teaching in the 7th grade, so just before high school in Australia, and it feels like nothing's changed. Everything is still the same. They're still reading the same books. They're still looking at the same viewpoints. There's nothing new that they're learning that I didn't learn about 12 years ago, and that's an amazing shock that we haven't really built on the teachers' academia, the teachers' understanding of students, and added on to that as well.
And that's so much a part of that science of reading movement that I'm talking about, the call for change and change in how we teach reading and writing and spelling up through the grades, the importance of vocabulary, the importance of comprehension. And so, it's, again, I'm very hopeful. We haven't made the kinds of changes that are needed, but I think the science of reading movement is moving in that direction.
That's really good news to know that there is going to be changes in the future on the different ways, because I think it definitely is a good sign of hope, a good sign of a lot of relief that I think people with sort of other kinds of difficulties didn't really get to receive back when they were in school. So, and back before school as well, I think is a big impact, as we were talking about today.
So, Dina, before leaving, I want to share with parents and teachers some books new books that I've done very recently, and they are targeted at different audiences. This one is a great book for both parents and teachers, and it's called Raising Confident Readers: How to Teach Your Child to Read and Write from Baby to Age 7. And a lot of what we discussed about the importance of starting early, even at birth, and how to read and talk with kids in that incredible developmental space between birth and toddlerhood and preschool. It's a book that I would recommend. This one, it's entitled Brain Words: How the Science of Reading Informs Teaching. This book I wrote, it just came out, and it's came out in, actually 2019, but it's so popular we're doing a revision of it. And I co-authored it with a brilliant scientist, a Canadian scientist, Jean Willett. And he and I kind of formed a scientist of education and scientist of, he's a clinical psychologist and cognitive psychologist. And so for anyone interested in that movement, the science of reading, there are wonderful chapters on how the brain works. The good thing about this book is that it's not 400 pages. It's written for teachers and parents, and it's affordable, very practical. And finally, if you have parents or teachers who are in that critical area of beginning reading, like kindergarten and first grade, and working on those phases, we have a book called Go Read: Building Brain Words for Beginners. And it's scripted, and it's actually about 20-minute lessons a week. And it'd be very easy for parents who often write me and contact me and say, well, I need a curriculum. I don't know how to teach. I'm not trained in how to teach. And so homeschoolers and teachers have found that book very, very powerful. And that one's available on Amazon. Go Read: Richard Gentry, Jean Willett, and Building Brain Words and Beginners.
That book sounds like an incredible way for a parent to know exactly how to teach a child, especially when they're sort of a busy parent as well. Having that 5 to 20 minutes a week seems like it's such a reasonable time for a parent to sort of be able to have that one-on-one, face-to-face contact with a child as well, sort of building up their not only their vocabulary, but also such a way for a good communication skill between the two of them.
Absolutely. Very good.
No, that book sounds incredible to me. I think a lot of parents, I know my parent would probably wish to have that when I was younger and raising me and raising two kids with completely different skill sets. I think that would have been a great read. So thank you so much for sharing with that. And that's available on Amazon. Are they all available on Amazon?
They are all available on Amazon. Yes.
Okay, perfect. And I'll definitely have the link down for those books if anyone would like to go ahead and take a look at them and find out a little bit more about them as well. So thank you so much, Richard, for joining me on the show today. It was amazing having you on and knowing a whole lot more of information than I did about the importance of literacy for a child. If there's a way that I guess anyone of the audience would like to find out a little bit more about you, is there a website that they're able to go to?
there is. They can go to J. That's for my first name, the letter J. RichardGentry.com. And I love hearing from parents. I hear from parents all over the world, and so my contact information is there as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll definitely have that in the link below as well. I think it would be amazing for any of the audience to say that they've heard you on the podcast, and just let them know, and let you know as well that they've listened to you. I think it's important to have that kind of impact, and I think you're definitely doing a really good job. So I really commend you for the work that you've done so far.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you all. You're doing great work over there.
Well, thank you so much. And I hope you guys learned as much as I did when it comes to literacy, and it's important for a child. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargeant. Thanks for tuning in.